The rain hammered against the windows of the Lewandowski estate, like desperate fists seeking entry. I pressed my forehead against the cold glass of the servants' corridor, watching sheets of water blur the manicured gardens into abstract paintings of green and gray. March in the city always brought storms, but this one felt different, charged with an electricity that made my skin prickle. 6 months I'd worked in this mansion. 6 months of keeping my eyes lowered and my hands busy. 6 months of pretending I didn't notice the way Marek Lewandowski moved through rooms like smoke, silent and inevitable. The other staff whispered about him in corners, voices hushed with fear and fascination. The man who controlled the city's underground antiquities trade, who could make priceless artifacts disappear and reappear at will, whose word was law in circles that operated beyond the reach of ordinary justice. I was 21 and should have known better than to accept employment in such a household. But my grandmother's medical bills had piled higher than my pride, and the salary Marek offered was 3 times what any legitimate position would pay. So I'd signed the contract, moved into the small room on the 3rd floor, and learned to become invisible. Tonight, invisibility proved impossible. Kasia, Helena's weathered face appeared in the doorway of the kitchen, her usual composure fractured by worry. Something's wrong with Mr. Lewandowski. He dismissed everyone hours ago, but I heard him in the study. He sounds unwell. My pulse quickened despite my better judgment. Have you called Dr. Kowalski? He's not answering his phone, and the master forbade me from calling anyone else. Her fingers twisted in her apron, but I can hear him through the door. He's burning up with fever, talking to people who aren't there. Someone needs to check on him. The unspoken question hung between us. Helena had worked for the Lewandowski family for 20 years. She knew the rules. No one entered Marek's private study without explicit permission. To do so could mean immediate dismissal, or worse. But the image of him alone and delirious while staff cowered in fear sparked something defiant in my chest. "I'll go," I heard myself say. Helena's eyes widened. "Kasia, if he's coherent enough to be angry, then he'll fire me." I untied my apron, hanging it on the hook by the door. But if he's truly ill and something happens because we were too afraid to help, how will we live with that? The study door was unlocked, which should have been my first warning. Marek never left anything unsecured. I pushed it open slowly, the heavy oak swinging inward to reveal a room lit only by the dying fire in the hearth, and a single desk lamp casting long shadows. He was slumped in the leather chair behind his desk, his usually immaculate appearance disheveled in a way that made my breath catch. His white shirt was unbuttoned at the collar, damp with sweat, his dark hair falling across his forehead. Even in illness, he was devastatingly beautiful in that dangerous way that had always made me keep my distance. "Mr. Lewandowski?" I approached cautiously, my voice soft. "Sir, you're unwell. Please let me help you." His eyes opened, but they didn't focus properly. Gray eyes that normally held such cold calculation now swam with fever and confusion. "Magdalena?" The name emerged as a desperate whisper. "You came back." I knelt beside his chair, pressing my palm to his forehead. Heat radiated from his skin, alarming in its intensity. "I'm not Magdalena, sir. It's Kasia, your housekeeper. You're burning up. We need to get you to bed and call the doctor." Liar. His hand shot out, gripping my wrist with surprising strength. "I know your face. I've memorized every line, every curve. You promised you'd never leave, and then you vanished like smoke." The pain in his voice was raw, vulnerable in a way I'd never heard from him. Whoever Magdalena had been, she'd left wounds that fever had torn open. "I'm here now," I said, the lie feeling necessary, merciful. "But you need to rest. Can you stand?" He tried to rise, but his legs buckled. I caught him, my small frame struggling under his weight as I guided him toward the leather sofa against the wall. He collapsed onto it with a groan, pulling me down with him so suddenly I found myself trapped against his chest, Don't leave again, he murmured into my hair. I searched for you for years. Years, Magdalena. Do you know what that did to me? What I became? My heart hammered against my ribs. I should have pulled away, should have maintained the professional distance that had kept me safe these 6 months. But something in his broken confession held me frozen. I won't leave, I whispered. The words both promise and lie. His hand came up to cup my face, fingers tracing my cheekbone with a gentleness that contradicted everything I knew about him. You're so beautiful. I'd forgotten how beautiful. All these years I've tried to forget, tried to bury it under power and control and fear. But you haunt me still. Merrick. I breathed his first name for the first time, abandoning all pretense of formality. And then he kissed me. It should have been a fevered mistake, clumsy and confused. Instead, it was devastating in its intensity, a claiming that spoke of years of hunger and loneliness. His lips moved against mine with desperate purpose, one hand tangling in my hair, while the other pressed against the small of my back, holding me to him as though I might disappear. I should have pulled away, should have remembered my place, the vast chasm between employer and employee, the danger inherent in this man's world. But 6 months of hidden attraction, of watching him move through his domain with lethal grace, of wondering what those stern lips might feel like, all came crashing down on my restraint. I kissed him back with a boldness that shocked me. My fingers found the damp skin of his throat, feeling his pulse race beneath my touch. I'd spent so long being sweet and servile, the perfect invisible domestic, that this sudden surge of desire felt like awakening from a long sleep. When he finally pulled back, his eyes had cleared slightly, focusing on my face with dawning horror. "You're not Magdalena," he whispered, the realization cutting through his fever. "No," I agreed, my voice steady despite my racing heart. "I'm Kasia, your housekeeper." "Kasia," he repeated the name as though tasting it. "The girl with honey-colored hair who hums while she cleans. The one who thinks I don't notice her." Heat flooded my cheeks. "You're delirious. You should rest." I tried to rise, but his grip tightened. "I notice everything, Kasia. The way you bite your lower lip when you're concentrating. How you always smell of lavender and lemon polish. The fact that you're the only person in this house who looks at me without fear." "That's because I'm either very brave or very foolish," I said, finding that dangerous boldness again. A ghost of a smile touched his lips. "Which do you think it is?" "I think," I said carefully, "that you're burning up and need medical attention. And I think we should both forget this happened." "Could you?" The question held a challenge. "Forget?" I met his gaze, seeing past the fever to the sharp intelligence beneath. "Could you?" "No," he admitted, his thumb brushing my lower lip. "I don't think I could." The moment stretched between us, charged with possibilities and dangers. Then his eyes rolled back and his grip loosened as consciousness fled. I caught him as he slumped sideways, his breathing shallow and rapid. "Helena," I called, my voice sharp with urgency. "Call Dr. Kowalski now. Tell him it's an emergency." The next hours passed in a blur of cold compresses and worried murmurs. Dr. Kowalski arrived near midnight, his examination swift and professional. "Pneumonia," he pronounced, caught early enough to treat at home if we were vigilant. He left antibiotics and instructions, promising to return in the morning. I stayed in the study, monitoring Marek's fever through the night. Helena brought blankets and tea, her eyes knowing as she looked between us. "Be careful, child," she whispered, before leaving me alone with him. Men like Marek Lewandowski don't forget debts or kisses. As dawn broke over the city, painting the study in shades of gold and amber, Marek's fever finally broke. His eyes opened, clear and focused, finding me immediately where I sat curled in the chair beside the sofa. "You stayed," he observed, his voice rough. "Someone had to make sure you didn't die in your sleep." "And the kiss?" His gaze was direct, uncompromising. Did that happen? Or was it fever dream? I could have lied, could have dismissed it as delirium. Instead, I met his eyes with that same boldness that had surprised us both. "It happened." "Good," he said, a slow smile curving his lips. "Then I didn't imagine how you tasted, like honey and defiance." "Mr. Lewandowski." "Marek," he interrupted. "You've seen me at my weakest, kissed me in my fever. I think we're past formalities, don't you, Kasia?" The way he said my name sent shivers down my spine. I'd crossed an invisible line in the night, stepped from the safety of servitude into something far more dangerous. "This can't happen again," I said, forcing firmness into my voice. "You're my employer. I'm your housekeeper. There are lines we shouldn't cross." He sat up slowly, swinging his legs to the floor. Even weakened by illness, he radiated power. "Lines," he mused, "are just suggestions made by people afraid of what lies beyond them. Tell me, Kasia, are you afraid?" I should have said yes, should have fled to my small room and packed my belongings. Instead, I stayed rooted to the spot, caught in his gray gaze like a bird mesmerized by a serpent. "I should be," I admitted. "Everyone else is." "But you're not everyone else, are you?" He reached out, his fingers brushing mine where they rested on the chair arm. "You came to me when others would have cowered. You stayed when you could have run. Why?" The question demanded honesty I wasn't sure I possessed. "Because leaving someone to suffer alone felt worse than risking your anger." Something shifted in his expression, vulnerability flickering beneath the usual mask of control. "No one has cared about my suffering in a very long time." "Perhaps," I said softly, "you haven't let them." The words hung between us, a truth too intimate for the growing light of morning. Marek's hand closed fully over mine, his thumb tracing circles on my palm. "Stay," he said. Not an order, but something dangerously close to a plea. Not just as my housekeeper. Stay as whatever this is becoming. "And what is this becoming?" I asked, my heart hammering. "Something that will either save us both," he replied, "or destroy us completely. I'm not sure which yet." It should have been a warning. Should have sent me running for safety. Instead, I felt that dangerous boldness rise again, the part of me that had been suppressed for too long by necessity and propriety. "Then I suppose," I said, my voice steady despite the fear and exhilaration warring in my chest, "we'll find out together." His smile this time was genuine, transforming his usually stern face into something almost boyish. "Dangerous words, Kasia. I hope you're prepared for the consequences." "I think," I replied, leaning forward until our faces were mere inches apart, "that neither of us has any idea what we're getting into." "No," he agreed, his breath warm against my lips. "But I find I don't care anymore." This time when he kissed me, there was no fever to blame, no delirium to excuse what we both wanted. There was only the dangerous truth that in one storm-filled night, everything had changed. April melted into May, and the kiss that should have been a mistake became a secret that transformed everything. Marek recovered from his pneumonia, but something in him had shifted, softened in ways that only I seemed to witness. In public, before his associates and staff, he remained the cold and calculating antiquities dealer, whose reputation preceded him like a shadow. But in the stolen moments we found, he became someone different, someone who smiled when I challenged his imperious commands with raised eyebrows and witty retorts. Someone who sought me out in the library late at night, not for passion but for conversation that ranged from philosophy to poetry. Someone who looked at me as though I were a priceless artifact he'd finally acquired after years of searching. I should have been wary of the intensity with which he pursued me, should have recognized the possessiveness lurking beneath his tenderness. But I was 21, and had never been looked at the way Marek looked at me, as though I were simultaneously precious and dangerous, something to be cherished and controlled. "You're humming again," he observed one evening in mid-May, looking up from the ledgers he'd been reviewing in his study. I'd been dusting the bookshelves, a task I no longer needed to perform, now that my role had evolved into something undefined. But old habits died hard. "Am I?" I set down the cloth, turning to face him. "Does it disturb you?" "Everything about you disturbs me," he replied, but his smile took the sting from the words. "Come here." I crossed to his desk with the easy familiarity that had developed between us. He pulled me onto his lap, his arms circling my waist as I laughed in protest. "Marek, someone could walk in." "Let them." His lips found the sensitive spot below my ear. "The entire household already knows you're mine." The possessive phrase should have alarmed me, but instead, it sent warmth pooling in my stomach. "Yours?" I teased, tilting my head to give him better access. "I don't recall signing ownership papers." "Don't need papers," he murmured against my skin. "You became mine the moment you walked into this study during that storm. You just didn't know it yet." I turned in his arms, straddling him in the leather chair with a boldness that still surprised me. This was who I became around him, someone confident and daring, someone who matched his intensity with fire of her own. "And what if I decided I didn't want to be owned?" I challenged, my fingers threading through his hair. His eyes darkened, that dangerous edge I'd learned to recognize flickering to life. "Then I'd remind you that some cages are gilded, Cassia, and some captives don't want to escape." He was right, and we both knew it. Whatever this was between us, trap or treasure, I'd walked into it willingly and stayed by choice. The mansion that had once felt like mere employment had become something else entirely, a world where I was no longer invisible but central, no longer servant, but something he couldn't quite define or control. The kiss that followed was fierce, claiming, a reminder of the power dynamic that we both pretended didn't exist. But I gave as good as I got, my teeth catching his lower lip hard enough to make him groan. "Careful, little bird," he warned, his hands tightening on my hips. "You're playing with fire." "Good," I breathed against his mouth. "I'm tired of being careful." It was true. 6 months of caution had given way to 2 months of reckless abandon. I knew this couldn't last, that eventually reality would intrude on our private world. But in the moment, wrapped in his arms with his heart beating against mine, I didn't care about consequences. The first sign that reality had already intruded came in early June. I woke one morning with my stomach churning, barely making it to the bathroom before losing what little I'd eaten the night before. I told myself it was something I'd eaten, a stomach bug making rounds among the staff. But when it happened 3 mornings in a row, a cold suspicion began to form. I counted back weeks with trembling fingers. My cycle, usually reliable, was late. Very late. "No," I whispered to my pale reflection in the mirror. "Please, no." But the pharmacy test I bought during a rare trip into the city confirmed what my body already knew. 2 pink lines, stark and undeniable against the white plastic. I was pregnant. For a full day, I moved through the mansion in a daze, mechanical in my responses, distant in a way that drew concerned looks from Helena and suspicious glances from Marek. That night, he cornered me in the library where I'd been staring at the same page of a book for an hour. "What's wrong?" His voice was gentle, but the command beneath was unmistakable. "You've been avoiding me." "I'm not," I began, but he cut me off. "Don't lie to me, Kasia. Whatever it is, tell me. The words stuck in my throat. How did I tell him that the relationship we'd carefully kept undefined now had the most definite consequence imaginable? That the man who valued control above all else was about to lose it in the most fundamental way? I can't, I whispered, setting down the book with shaking hands. I need time to think. His expression hardened. Time to think about what? About leaving? The accusation hit too close to the mark. I had been thinking about leaving, about disappearing before he discovered the truth, before I became trapped by more than just emotion. Merrick, please. No. He closed the distance between us in 2 strides, his hands gripping my shoulders. Whatever this is, whatever you're hiding, we face it together. That's what this is, isn't it? Together. The raw vulnerability in his question broke something inside me. Here was Marek Lewandowski, feared by the city's underworld, looking at me as though I held his entire world in my hands. And I did, in a way neither of us had anticipated. I'm pregnant, I said, the words emerging flatly, stripped of emotion by shock. 2 months. The silence that followed was deafening. Marek's hands fell from my shoulders, his face cycling through expressions too quickly to catalog. Shock, calculation, something that might have been fear. And then, most terrifying of all, satisfaction. Pregnant, he repeated, the word almost reverent. With my child. Merrick, I didn't plan this. I didn't mean for it to happen. I know. He pulled me against his chest, one hand cradling the back of my head. But it has happened. And now everything changes. The certainty in his voice sent alarm bells ringing. What do you mean? He pulled back, his gray eyes boring into mine with an intensity that made me want to look away. I mean that now you can never leave. Don't you see, Kasia? This child binds us together permanently. You're mine now, in every way that matters. Cold dread washed through me despite the warmth of his embrace. Marek, a baby doesn't mean ownership, doesn't it? His smile was dangerous, beautiful, terrifying. You carry my air, my blood. Did you think I'd let you walk away from that? Let you raise my child somewhere I can't see, can't protect, can't control? I pushed against his chest, needing space to breathe. This is exactly what I was afraid of. You're not talking about us, about a future together. You're talking about possession. Call it what you want. His voice was steel wrapped in silk. But understand this. You're not leaving. Not now. Not ever. I'll give you everything, Kasia. Luxury, security, protection. But freedom to leave? That's the one thing I can never offer. Panic clawed at my throat. This was Marek at his most dangerous, when he decided something belonged to him, and would stop at nothing to keep it. I'd seen glimpses of it in how he conducted his business, but never turned on me with such naked intensity. I need air, I gasped, pulling free from his grip. I need to think. There's nothing to think about, he called after me as I fled toward the door. The decision's already made, Kasia. By your body, by fate, by me. You're staying. I ran through the darkened hallways to my small room on the 3rd floor, the room I'd kept even after our relationship evolved, needing some space that was mine alone. Once inside, I locked the door and sank onto the narrow bed, my mind racing. I had to leave. Had to get out before Merrick's protective possessiveness became an inescapable cage. I'd been foolish to think someone like him could share power, could see me as an equal rather than a possession to be guarded and controlled. The next morning, I woke before dawn, moving with silent precision as I packed a small bag with essentials. Cash I'd been saving, the few pieces of jewelry my grandmother had left me, clothes that would travel well. I waited until I heard Marek's car leave for an early meeting with a potential client, then made my way downstairs. Helena was already in the kitchen, her knowing eyes taking in my bag, my coat, my determined expression. "You're leaving," she said, not a question. "I have to." She nodded slowly. "The pregnancy?" I stared at her, wondering how she knew. But Helena had always seen more than she let on. "He told you that you couldn't go," she guessed, reading the answer in my face. "And so you're running." "It's not running if you're escaping a cage." "Even a golden one?" She moved to the counter, pulling out fresh bread and wrapping it in cloth. "Here, take this. You'll need strength for wherever you're going." I accepted the package, tears stinging my eyes at her unexpected kindness. "Thank you, Helena. For everything." "One thing, child." She gripped my wrist, her weathered face serious. "Marek Lewandowski is not a man who accepts loss. If you leave, he will search for you. And when he finds you, and he will find you, his anger will be terrible. Then I'll have to make sure he doesn't find me." I made it as far as the front gate before headlights cut through the morning mist. The car that pulled up was Marek's, returned far too early from his meeting. My heart sank as he emerged, his face a mask of cold fury barely held in check. "Going somewhere?" His voice was dangerously soft as he approached, each step measured and deliberate. I lifted my chin, refusing to show the fear racing through my veins. "Away from here. Away from you. With my child." It wasn't a question. "Did you really think I'd let that happen?" "You don't own me, Marek. The baby doesn't change that." He laughed, a sound without humor. "Doesn't it? Tell me, Kasia, where would you go? Back to your grandmother's tiny apartment? She's in a care facility now, isn't she? Funded by your generous salary. A salary that would disappear the moment you walk through that gate." The casual cruelty of the threat stole my breath. "You wouldn't—" "I would do anything to keep you here, to keep my child safe." He closed the distance between us, his hand coming to rest possessively on my still flat stomach. "I got you pregnant, Kasia. Some might call it an accident, but I've come to see it as the universe's way of ensuring you could never escape. You're mine now." The mansion transformed from sanctuary to prison overnight. After Marek intercepted my escape attempt at the gate, he'd carried my bag back inside with one hand, while his other remained locked around my wrist, his grip gentle but unyielding. He hadn't shouted or threatened, which somehow made it worse. His calm acceptance of my attempted flight, as though he'd expected and planned for it, chilled me to the bone. "You'll stay in the master suite from now on," he'd informed me, his tone allowing no argument. "Where I can keep an eye on you." That had been 3 weeks ago, in late June. Now, as July's heat settled over the city like a suffocating blanket, I found myself living a surreal existence. My small room on the 3rd floor had been cleared out. My belongings moved to the sprawling master suite that I now shared with Marek. The irony wasn't lost on me. I'd achieved what many would consider a victory, moving from servants' quarters to the master's bed. But it felt like a defeat. The suite itself was beautiful in that cold, expensive way that characterized everything in Marek's world. Floor-to-ceiling windows overlooked the gardens, a king-sized bed dominated the space, and an ensuite bathroom featured a marble tub large enough for 2. A smaller room adjoined the suite, already being converted into a nursery by workers who came and went with swift efficiency. I spent my days moving through gilded spaces like a ghost, allowed anywhere within the mansion's walls but nowhere beyond them. The gates remained locked, the security system armed, and Marek's men stationed at every exit with instructions that were never spoken aloud but perfectly clear. I was not to leave. "You look tired," Marek observed one evening, finding me curled in the window seat watching the sunset paint the sky in shades of orange and purple. He'd just returned from a meeting, still wearing the tailored suit that made him look like exactly what he was: powerful, dangerous, untouchable. "I'm pregnant," I replied, without turning to look at him. "Tired comes with the territory." I heard him move across the room, felt the cushions dip as he sat beside me. "Are you sleeping well?" Dr. Kowalski said rest is crucial in the first trimester. The concern in his voice might have touched me if I didn't know what lay beneath it. Marek cared about my health because I carried his child. I was a vessel, precious for my cargo, valuable only as long as I remained pregnant and compliant. "I sleep fine," I lied. In truth, I spent most nights staring at the ceiling while Marek slept beside me, his arm draped possessively across my waist even in unconsciousness. "Cassia." His hand came to rest on my knee, warm through the thin fabric of my dress. "Look at me." I turned, meeting his gray eyes with the defiance that seemed to be my only remaining weapon. "What?" "I know you're angry. I know you feel trapped." His thumb traced circles on my knee, a gesture that would have been soothing if it weren't so controlling. "But this doesn't have to be a prison. Let yourself be happy about the baby. Let yourself accept what we have here." "What we have," I repeated, my voice sharp, "is you holding me captive while pretending it's for my own good." His jaw tightened, that dangerous edge flickering to life. "I'm protecting you, protecting our child. The world I operate in, the people I deal with, they'd see you as a weakness to exploit. Here, behind these walls, you're safe." "Safe," I laughed bitterly. "Is that what we're calling it? What would you call it?" He leaned closer, his presence overwhelming in the intimate space. "I've given you everything. The finest food, the best medical care, clothes, jewelry, anything you could want. Except freedom." The word hung between us, heavy as an anchor. Marek's expression hardened, his hand moving from my knee to cup my face with a gentleness that contradicted the steel in his voice. "Freedom is overrated, Cassia, and dangerous. Would you rather be free to struggle, to worry about money and safety and providing for our child alone? Or would you rather be here, protected and provided for, wanting for nothing?" "I'd rather," I said, my voice steady despite the tears threatening to spill, "have a choice in the matter." Something flickered in his eyes. Might have been pain or regret, but it was gone too quickly to identify, replaced by that implacable determination that defined him. "The choice was made when you let me kiss you," he said softly. "When you stayed that night instead of running. When you opened yourself to me in every way. You chose this, Cassia. Even if you didn't understand what you were choosing." He was right, in a way that made me hate both him and myself. I had chosen to stay after that first kiss, had chosen to fall into bed with him knowing who and what he was. But choosing to begin something was different from choosing to be trapped in it forever. "I was naive," I whispered. "I didn't understand." "You understood enough." His thumb brushed away a tear that had escaped despite my efforts. "You knew I was dangerous. Knew I took what I wanted and kept it. That's part of what drew you to me, wasn't it? The danger, the darkness. You just didn't expect to become one of the things I wanted to keep." The accuracy of his assessment stung. He was right. I had been drawn to the danger, had felt alive in a way I never had before when he looked at me with that intense focus. But being drawn to danger and being imprisoned by it were very different things. "I hate you sometimes," I said, the confession raw and honest. "I know." He pulled me against his chest, one hand tangling in my hair. "But you also love me. Or you're starting to, which terrifies you even more than the cage." I wanted to deny it, to insist that what I felt was purely fear and resentment. But my treacherous body had already begun to soften in his embrace, seeking the comfort he offered, even as my mind rebelled against the trap. "I don't want to love you," I admitted against his shoulder. "It makes everything harder." "Then don't." His lips found my temple, pressing a kiss there that felt like both benediction and brand. Hate me if you need to. Fight me. Challenge me. Make my life as difficult as I've made yours. Just don't leave me. The vulnerability beneath the command cracked something inside me. This was the truth at the heart of our twisted relationship. Merrick didn't just want to possess me. He needed me in a way that went beyond the child I carried, in a way that made him as much a prisoner as I was. Tell me about Magdalena, I said suddenly, the name I'd heard him speak in his fever returning to me. Who was she? Marek stiffened, his arms tightening around me reflexively. Why do you want to know? Because you said her name that night. Because you thought I was her when you kissed me. Because I think she's the reason you're so terrified of me leaving. He was silent for so long, I thought he wouldn't answer. Then, slowly, he began to speak, his voice distant with memory. Magdalena was my fiancée aussi when I was 25. Beautiful, intelligent, from a good family. I thought I loved her, thought we'd build an empire together. His chest rose and fell with a deep breath. Then she discovered exactly what kind of empire I was building. The illegal antiquities trade, the connections to organized crime, all of it. And she left, disappeared in the middle of the night, without a word. Did you search for her? For years. The admission was bitter. I turned over every stone, called in every favor, used every resource at my disposal. But she'd vanished completely. Later I learned she'd entered witness protection, testified against some of my associates in exchange for a new identity. Understanding dawned. So when I tried to leave, I saw Magdalena all over again, history repeating itself, the woman I cared for running from what I am. His arms tightened almost painfully. I can't let that happen twice, Kasia. I won't survive it again. The raw honesty in his confession should have softened me completely, but it also revealed the truth I'd been avoiding. Merrick wasn't going to let me go because he couldn't bear to. The pregnancy hadn't created the trap. It had only given him the justification he needed to spring it. So I pay for her sins, I said quietly. Trapped because she left. You're not paying for anything. He pulled back to look at me, his gray eyes intense. This isn't punishment, Kasia. It's protection. For both of us. Protection from what? From the pain of separation. From the danger of the outside world. From the loneliness that comes from choosing safety over connection. His hand moved to rest on my stomach, where our child grew. This baby gives us purpose, gives us a reason to make this work. But even without it, I'd have found a way to keep you. The certainty in his voice was both terrifying and, in some twisted way, comforting. At least with Marek, I always knew where I stood. There were no games, no false promises of freedom. Just brutal honesty wrapped in expensive silk. As summer deepened and my pregnancy became more visible, a strange routine developed. Mornings, I would wake to find Marek already dressed for whatever business demanded his attention that day. He'd kiss me goodbye with a tenderness that felt genuine, his hand always finding my growing belly before he left. Days I spent reading in the library, walking the gardens under the watchful eyes of security, or meeting with Dr. Kowalski for regular checkups. Marek had hired a cook who specialized in pregnancy-friendly meals, and Helena had been given a generous raise to serve as my companion during Marek's absences. Evenings belonged to us. Marek would return, sometimes tense from whatever dealings he'd conducted, and find me in our suite. We'd have dinner together, talk about mundane things like the baby's development or changes to the nursery. And then, inevitably, we'd end up in bed, where the complicated tangle of resentment and desire played out in the darkness. You're showing more, he observed one night in late August, his hand spanning my rounded belly as we lay tangled in sheets. It's beautiful. I looked down at where his hand rested, this tangible evidence of the life we'd created. Sometimes I forget to be angry when I feel her move. Is that terrible? Her? His eyes lit up with interest. You think it's a girl? Dr. Kowalski offered to tell us at the last appointment, but I said I wanted to wait. Still, I have a feeling. A mother's intuition, maybe. Zofia, he said softly. If it's a girl, it was my grandmother's name. The domesticity of the moment, planning our daughter's name as though we were a normal couple expecting their first child, created a bubble of fragile peace. In these moments, I could almost forget the cage, almost pretend we'd chosen this freely. Zofia Lewandowski. I tested the name. It's beautiful. Zofia Lewandowski. He agreed, then paused. Unless you'd prefer Zofia Lewandowski-Kaminsky. I never asked if you wanted to keep your grandmother's name in there. The offer, small as it was, felt like a concession to my autonomy. I'd like that, I admitted. A piece of my family to balance yours. He nodded, his fingers tracing patterns on my skin. Whatever makes you happy, Kasia, within reason. And what's reasonable? I asked, hearing the edge in my voice return. By your definition? His hand stilled. Anything that doesn't involve you leaving. There it was, the boundary that defined our entire relationship. I could have anything, be anything, want anything, as long as I never wanted freedom. What if I promised not to run? The question escaped before I'd fully formed it. What if I gave you my word that I'd stay, raise Zofia here? Would you loosen the leash? Merrick was quiet for a long moment, his hand resuming its gentle motion on my belly. You'd hate me less if you had more freedom. I don't hate you, I said, the truth surprising even me. I hate the cage. There's a difference. Is there? His voice was soft, thoughtful. Or is the cage just an extension of me? I turned to face him fully, seeing vulnerability in his expression that he rarely showed. You're more than your need to control, Merrick, but you have to choose to be. And if I can't? If letting go means losing you? Then we're both prisoners, I said. And Zofia will be born into a beautiful prison instead of a home. The words hit their mark. I saw him flinch, saw the battle play out across his features. The man who'd been abandoned fighting against the man who wanted to be better, for me, for our daughter. I'll think about it, he said finally. But Kasia, I need you to understand something. The world I operate in, the people I deal with, they're always looking for weaknesses to exploit. You and Zofia, you're the only weaknesses I have. Keeping you safe, keeping you close. It's not just about control. It's about survival. Then teach me to survive it, I challenged. Don't just lock me away and hope that's enough. Teach me what I need to know. Let me understand your world so I can navigate it. He studied me with those calculating gray eyes, and I could see him weighing the risks, measuring my words for sincerity. Finally, he nodded slowly. All right, but on one condition. What? You stop looking for ways to escape. You commit to being here, to making this work. Not because you're trapped, but because you're choosing it. It was a devil's bargain, trading one kind of captivity for another. But at least this cage came with the promise of knowledge, of agency, of something more than passive imprisonment. I'll try, I said carefully. I can't promise to stop wanting freedom, but I can promise to stop actively seeking escape. For now. For now, he echoed, a slight smile touching his lips. I suppose that's the best I can hope for. He kissed me then, and I let myself sink into it, let myself feel the complicated tangle of emotions this man evoked. Resentment and desire, fear and fascination, hatred and something dangerously close to love. As August gave way to September, and my pregnancy progressed into the third trimester, I began to see a different side of Marek's world. He started bringing me to meetings held at the mansion, letting me observe as he negotiated deals for rare artifacts. He explained the legal gray areas his business operated in, the careful balance between legitimate antiquities dealing and the underground market that had made his fortune. "This piece," he said one afternoon, showing me a Byzantine mosaic fragment, "was looted from a Syrian site during the Civil War. Technically, it shouldn't be on the market at all. But if I don't acquire it, it'll go to someone with far less scruples about its eventual fate. I have a buyer lined up at a museum that will restore it and display it properly." "So you're the ethical criminal?" I asked, my tone teasing but curious. "I'm a pragmatist," he corrected. "The illegal antiquities trade will exist whether I participate or not. At least this way, some pieces end up where they belong instead of in private collections, where no one will ever see them." It was a rationalization, but I could see the logic. And slowly, I began to understand the complexity of the world he'd built. Neither purely good nor wholly evil, but operating in shades of gray that most people preferred to pretend didn't exist. By October, my belly had swollen to the point where moving was uncomfortable, and Marek had become almost comically protective. He'd curtailed his travel, conducting most business from the mansion. He interviewed pediatricians with the intensity of a military interrogation, researched baby products with the same focus he applied to authenticating priceless artifacts. "You're nesting," I teased one evening, finding him reorganizing the nursery for the third time. "I'm preparing," he corrected, adjusting the angle of the crib one more time. "There's a difference." I waddled over to him, my hand finding his arm. "Marek, it's perfect. Everything is perfect. You can stop now." He turned to me, and I saw the fear beneath his meticulous planning. What if I'm not good at this? What if I'm too controlling, too cold? What if she grows up resenting me the way you... He stopped, but the implication hung between us. "The way I resent you?" I finished gently. "Marek, you're learning. We both are. And yes, your controlling nature will probably be a problem when she's a teenager. But love is also control's opposite. You just have to choose which one to lead with." His hand covered mine where it rested on his arm. "Show me how. How to what? How to love without controlling. How to protect without imprisoning. You said I'm more than my need for control, but I've never had to prove it. Show me how." The request, so vulnerable and sincere, cracked the last of my hardened defenses. This man, feared by so many, was asking me to teach him how to be gentle, how to be a father, a partner, something more than the cage he'd built around us both. "It starts with trust," I said. "Trusting that I'll stay, not because I can't leave, but because I don't want to. Trusting that Zofia will love you not because she has no other option, but because you're worthy of it. And if that trust is misplaced, then you deal with it. But you can't build a family on fear, Marek. Only on faith." In January 2020, 3 weeks before my due date, I went into labor. It started as a mild discomfort in the early hours of the morning, progressing rapidly into pain that had me gasping for breath. Marek, who'd been sleeping lightly since my 9th month began, was instantly alert. "It's time," I managed to say through gritted teeth. What followed was chaos organized by Marek's efficient mind. Dr. Kowalski was called, the hospital notified, our pre-packed bags collected. But as another contraction hit, stronger than the last, Marek made a split-second decision. "We're not going to make it to the hospital in time," he said, his voice calm despite the tension I could see in his shoulders. "Dr. Kowalski, how fast can you get here? The delivery happened in our bedroom, in the space where we'd argued and made love and slowly built something that resembled a relationship." Dr. Kowalski arrived with a nurse, turning our suite into an impromptu delivery room. "You're doing beautifully," Marek murmured, his hand gripping mine as I bore down through another contraction. "Just a little more, Kasia," Just a little more. And then, with one final push and a scream that felt like it tore through my entire being, Zofia entered the world. Her cry was immediate and indignant, a tiny voice announcing her displeasure at being evicted from her comfortable home. "A girl," Dr. Kowalski confirmed, placing the squalling bundle on my chest. "Healthy and strong." I looked down at my daughter, this perfect tiny human with Merrick's dark hair, and what I suspected would become my grandmother's eyes, and felt something shift fundamentally inside me. All the resentment, all the anger, all the complex tangle of emotions, simplified into one overwhelming feeling. Fierce, protective love. "Zofia," I whispered, touching her impossibly small hand. "Hello, little one." Merrick leaned over us both, his expression transforming into something I'd never seen before. Wonder, pure and undiluted, mixed with a tenderness that made him look young and vulnerable. "She's perfect," he breathed. "You're both perfect." In that moment, in the aftermath of bringing life into the world, the cage didn't matter. The complicated history, the forced proximity, the twisted path that had led us here, all of it faded into insignificance next to the reality of our daughter. We had created life together, and in doing so, we'd created something neither of us had expected: a family. The first 3 months of Zofia's life passed in a blur of sleepless nights and overwhelming love. Marek, who had approached fatherhood with the same intensity he brought to everything else, proved surprisingly adept at midnight diaper changes and soothing a fussy infant. We took turns walking her through the mansion when she wouldn't settle, developed a wordless communication about who would handle which feeding, and slowly found our rhythm as parents. By April 2020, as I turned 22 and spring returned to the gardens, something had fundamentally shifted between us. The cage was still there. I still couldn't leave without Marek's knowledge and approval. But it no longer felt like the defining feature of our relationship. Instead, we'd become something that resembled actual partners, united by our daughter and the strange domestic peace we'd built. "She has your smile," Marek observed one evening, cradling Zofia against his shoulder as she dozed contentedly after her feeding. "When she's sleeping like this, I can see exactly how she'll look when she's older." I moved to sit beside him on the sofa, tucking myself against his side in a gesture that had become natural over months of proximity. "And she has your determination. Have you noticed how she glares when she doesn't get what she wants? Pure Lewandowski stubbornness." He laughed, the sound genuine and unguarded in a way that still surprised me. "I have no idea what you're talking about. I'm the picture of flexibility and compromise." "Right," I said dryly. "That's exactly how I'd describe the man who restructured his entire business so he could work from home for 6 months. That was practical, not stubborn. There's a difference." I tilted my head to look at him, taking in the softened lines of his face, the way fatherhood had gentled something hard in him. "You've changed, you know, since Zofia." "Have I?" He shifted Zofia carefully, her small body rising and falling with her peaceful breaths. "Or have I just finally had a reason to show you what was always there?" It was a fair question. The man who'd held me captive had always been capable of tenderness. I'd seen it in our stolen moments before everything became complicated. But parenthood had drawn it to the surface, made it his default rather than his exception. "Both, maybe," I admitted. "You're learning to control less and trust more, even if it terrifies you." His free hand found mine, fingers interlacing in a gesture that had become our private language. "You terrify me. This terrifies me." He glanced down at Zofia. "Loving you both this much, needing you this much, knowing that my entire world could crumble if anything happened to either of you. That's what love is," I said softly. "Vulnerability, risk, the opposite of control." "Then I'm deeply in love," he replied, his gray eyes meeting mine, "and deeply terrified." The moment hung between us, intimate and honest in a way our relationship had never quite achieved before. I leaned up to kiss him, a gesture of comfort and connection rather than passion. "We're terrified together," I said against his lips. That has to count for something. The peaceful bubble we'd built shattered 2 weeks later. I was in the library with Zofia, reading aloud from a picture book while she gurgled and grabbed at the colorful pages, when Helena appeared in the doorway. Her usually composed face was tight with worry. "Kasia, Mr. Lewandowski needs you in his study immediately. He said to bring the baby." Alarm prickled along my spine. Marek never summoned me to his study during business hours, and he certainly never asked for Zofia to be present during work matters. "What's happened?" "I don't know, but there are 3 of his men with him, and they all looked grim when they arrived." I gathered Zofia into my arms, her solid warmth a comfort against my growing anxiety, and made my way through the mansion's familiar corridors. The study door was partially open, and I could hear Marek's voice, cold and controlled in a way I hadn't heard in months. "I don't care what it costs or who you have to lean on. Find out everything about Wojciech's operations, every business, every asset, every person who works for him. I want a complete picture by tomorrow." I knocked softly and pushed the door fully open. Marek stood behind his desk, looking every inch the dangerous man I'd first known, all softness stripped away. 3 of his most trusted security personnel stood near the windows, their expressions professionally blank. "Kasia." His face transformed when he saw us, fear flickering beneath the cold control. "Come in and close the door." I did as instructed, my heart hammering. "What's going on?" Helena said. "Wojciech Dabrowski made contact this morning." Marek's voice was careful, controlled. "He's a rival dealer I've been edging out of the market for the past year. He's not happy about it." "What does that have to do with us?" Marek moved around the desk, approaching me with measured steps. His hand came up to cup my face, thumb brushing my cheekbone. "He knows about you, about Zofia, and he's threatening to use you to force my hand in certain business negotiations." The room seemed to tilt. I clutched Zofia tighter, her innocent weight grounding me. Threatening how? He suggested that accidents happen to young mothers and babies, that it would be tragic if something were to befall the family of Marek Lewandowski. His voice remained calm, but I could see the fury burning beneath the surface. "He's hoping I'll back down. Give him territory I've claimed, in exchange for your safety." "But we're here," I said, gesturing to the mansion around us. "Behind your security. How could he possibly?" "Men like Wojciech don't make empty threats, Kasia. If he says he can reach you, I have to assume he's telling the truth." Marek's hand dropped to Zofia, touching her dark hair with infinite gentleness. "I won't take that risk. Not with either of you." One of the security men, a granite-faced individual named Stefan, cleared his throat. "Sir, we've already doubled the perimeter guards and updated all security protocols. No one gets within 100 meters of this property without us knowing." "It's not enough." Marek's gaze never left mine. "Wojciech operates in the same gray areas I do. He knows how to circumvent security, how to find weaknesses. I need to eliminate the threat entirely." A chill ran down my spine at the implication. "Marek, what are you planning?" "Nothing you need to worry about." He turned to his men. "Dismissed. I'll call you when I need updates." After they filed out, leaving us alone, I confronted him directly. "You can't just have this man killed because he threatened us. That makes you no better than—" "Than what?" His voice was sharp. "Than the criminal you've always known I am? I've never pretended to be anything else, Kasia." "You've changed," I insisted. "Since Zofia, you've been different. Gentler. Don't throw that away because some rival dealer made threats he probably can't even carry out. You don't understand. He pulled me against him, careful of Zofia between us. When Wojciech threatened you, threatened our daughter, something broke in me. All the progress I've made, all the control I've learned, it doesn't matter when faced with losing you. I'll burn down the entire city if that's what it takes to keep you both safe. The fierce protectiveness in his voice should have frightened me. Instead, I felt something shift in my understanding of this complicated man. His possessiveness, his need to control, all of it stemmed from a terror of loss so profound he'd do anything to prevent it. Then find another way, I said, pulling back to look at him. You're brilliant, Marek. Surely you can outmaneuver this man without resorting to violence. There is no other way with people like Wojciech. They only understand power and force. Then make him understand consequence, I challenged. You have connections, resources, influence. Use them. Destroy his business legally if you have to, but don't become a murderer for us. Zofia doesn't need that kind of father. My words hit their mark. I saw him flinch, saw the battle play out across his features. The old Marek, who would have eliminated a threat without hesitation, warring against the man who'd learned to kiss his daughter's forehead each morning and read her bedtime stories each night. You're asking me to be better than I am, he said quietly. I'm asking you to be the man I've seen you become, the one who's worthy of our daughter's love. He was silent for a long moment, his arms still around us both, his face pressed against my hair. Finally, he pulled back, resolution hardening his features. All right, I'll find another way. But you and Zofia stay in the mansion until this is resolved. No walks in the garden, no trips to the park. You don't leave this building. It was a return to the cage, but this time for a reason I could accept. How long? However long it takes to neutralize the threat. The next 2 weeks were tense. Marek threw himself into investigating Wojciech's operations with the same intensity he'd once applied to keeping me captive. He made calls at all hours, met with contacts who slipped in and out of the mansion under cover of darkness, and assembled a picture of his rival's empire piece by careful piece. I watched from the sidelines, caring for Zofia while Marek worked, occasionally offering observations when he shared his findings. Slowly, a plan took shape. Wojciech's operation looks legitimate on the surface, Marek explained one night, spreading documents across his desk while I sat in the corner with a sleeping Zofia. But he's been cutting corners, forging provenances, selling pieces that should be in museums to private collectors who don't ask questions. Can you prove it? With time and the right pressure points, yes. I've identified 3 of his recent sales that violated international heritage laws. If I can document them properly and put the evidence in the right hands. He trailed off, a cold smile crossing his face. What? Wojciech has been courting a particular collector, a very wealthy businessman with political connections. If that collector were to discover that the piece he just purchased is stolen property, that Wojciech knowingly sold him contraband. Marek's smile widened. He'd be ruined, not just financially, but criminally. He'd spend years fighting legal battles instead of threatening my family. It was elegant and ruthless, destroying a rival through exposure rather than violence. How long until you have enough evidence? Stefan's team is working on authentication documents now. We should have everything we need by the end of the week. True to his word, 5 days later, Marek set his plan in motion. I watched from the study as he made careful phone calls, planting seeds with Wojciech's collector, with heritage authorities, with journalists who specialized in art crime. He never lied, simply provided facts and let others draw their own conclusions. Within 48 hours, news broke about a scandal in the antiquities trade. Wojciech Dabrowski's name was everywhere, his business under investigation, his assets frozen pending legal proceedings. The collector Marek had targeted, furious at being made to look foolish, was using his political connections to ensure the full weight of the law came down on Wojciech's head. It's done, Marek said, finding me in the nursery where I was putting Zofia down for the night. Wojciech won't be threatening anyone for the foreseeable future. He'll be too busy fighting to stay out of prison. I studied his face, looking for signs of the old ruthlessness. Instead, I saw satisfaction, yes, but also something like pride. He'd won without bloodshed, using intelligence and strategy instead of violence. You did it, I said. You found another way. I did it for you, for her. He moved to the crib, looking down at our sleeping daughter. You were right. She doesn't need a father who solves problems through violence. She needs someone who can protect her through wit and will. I slipped my hand into his, squeezing gently. I'm proud of you. His eyes snapped to mine, surprise evident. You are? You could have done what you've always done, what would have been easier. But you chose to be better, for Zofia. That takes more strength than violence ever could. He pulled me against him, his embrace tight and grateful. You make me want to be better. Both of you do. As spring deepened into early May, with the threat eliminated and Zofia thriving, something fundamental shifted in our relationship. The cage that had defined us for so long began to feel less like imprisonment and more like protection, less like control and more like partnership. Marek began talking about the future, not in terms of keeping me captive, but in terms of building something together. He spoke of gradually legitimizing more of his business, of using his knowledge and connections for preservation rather than profit, of creating a legacy that Zofia could be proud of. I want to take you somewhere, he said one evening in late May, after Zofia had been put to bed. Will you trust me? It was the first time he'd asked me to leave the mansion since Wojciech's threat. I studied his face, seeing only sincerity. Where? The botanical gardens. I've arranged for private access after hours. I thought we could walk under the stars, just the two of us without security hovering. Without security? I raised an eyebrow. Marek, that doesn't sound like you at all. I'm learning to let go, he said. Or at least trying to. Will you come with me? I recognized it for what it was, a test for both of us. Could he trust me to return? Could I trust him to give me freedom without strings attached? Yes, I said. I'll come. The gardens were beautiful in the moonlight, silver and shadow playing across carefully tended beds of flowers and winding paths. We walked hand in hand, silent at first, simply existing together in a space that wasn't the mansion. Do you remember, Marek said eventually, when you accused me of getting you pregnant to trap you? I remember. I've been thinking about that lately, about how I framed it as fate, as the universe ensuring you couldn't escape. But the truth is more complicated. I waited, letting him work through whatever he needed to say. I think, he continued slowly, that I trapped myself as much as I trapped you. By insisting you stay, by building walls around us, I imprisoned us both. You were right to resist it, to fight me on it. And now? He stopped walking, turning to face me fully in the moonlight. Now I'm asking you to choose to stay. Not because you're pregnant or because I've locked the gates, but because you want to build this life with me, with us. It was the question I'd been avoiding for months, the choice I'd never truly been given. Did I love this complicated, dangerous man? Did I want the life we'd built together? Or had I simply accepted it as inevitable? I thought about Marek holding Zofia for the first time, about how he'd learned to soothe her cries and change her diapers with meticulous care. I thought about how he'd chosen legal destruction over violence when threatened, how he'd been slowly transforming his business into something he could be proud of. I thought about the man who kissed me goodbye each morning and found me each evening, who'd learned to ask instead of demand, to suggest instead of command. "I want to stay," I said. "Not because I'm trapped, but because this is where I choose to be. With you, with Zofia, building whatever comes next." His smile was radiant, transforming his usually stern face into something almost boyish. "You're sure?" "I'm sure." I reached up to cup his face, feeling the familiar scratch of stubble beneath my palm. "You said once that I was yours. But the truth is, Marek, you've been mine for just as long. You just didn't realize it until Zofia made it impossible to deny." He laughed, pulling me close. "I've been outmaneuvered by a woman barely over 20 and an infant not yet 4 months old. My reputation as a formidable opponent is in shambles." "Your reputation," I said, stretching up to kiss him, "is about to change anyway. From feared antiquities, dealer to devoted family man." "Is that so bad?" "It's perfect." We stood there in the moonlit garden, two people who'd found each other through circumstances that should have destroyed them, who'd built something real from imprisonment and defiance, who'd learned that sometimes the strongest cages are the ones we choose to stay in. By September 2020, as Zofia approached her first birthday and I turned 23, our life had settled into a rhythm that felt almost normal. The mansion that had once been my prison had transformed into a home, filled with the chaos of an active infant learning to crawl and the tentative peace of two people learning to be partners. Marek's business had undergone a dramatic transformation. He'd spent the summer working with cultural heritage organizations, using his extensive knowledge to help recover looted artifacts and return them to their countries of origin. The illegal aspects of his operation had been methodically dismantled, replaced with a legitimate consultancy that museums and governments paid handsomely for his expertise. "It's actually more profitable this way," he admitted one evening, bouncing Zofia on his knee while I prepared her dinner. "Who knew that being legal could be so lucrative?" "Everyone who's been telling you that for years," I replied, mashing bananas with a fork. "You just needed the right motivation to listen." His eyes met mine, warm with the affection that had slowly replaced the cold possession of our early days. I had the right motivation. I just needed time to recognize it. Zofia chose that moment to grab a handful of his hair, yanking with the gleeful strength only babies possessed. Marek winced, but didn't pull away, simply detached her small fingers gently while she giggled at the game. "You're getting good at that," I observed, "at being a father. I have an excellent teacher." He stood, settling Zofia into her high chair with practiced ease. "And a daughter, who doesn't let me get away with being controlling and distant." It was true. Zofia had drawn out a warmth in Marek that I suspected had been buried since childhood. He sang to her in Polish, told her stories about his grandmother, played peekaboo with the same intensity he'd once brought to business negotiations. Fatherhood had cracked open something in him that all my resistance never could. As autumn deepened and we began planning Zofia's first birthday party, Marek grew increasingly distracted. I'd find him staring into space during dinner, or working late into the night on projects he wouldn't discuss. At first, I worried he was falling back into old patterns, conducting business he didn't want me to know about. "Is everything all right?" I asked one evening after putting Zofia to bed, finding him in his study surrounded by papers. "You've been distant lately." He looked up, startled, as though he'd forgotten I was in the house. "I'm sorry. I've been working on something important, and it's consuming more attention than I'd like." "Is it business? Are you in trouble?" "No, nothing like that." He stood, crossing to where I lingered in the doorway. "It's personal. I'll tell you soon, I promise. I just need to get a few more things in order." The evasiveness bothered me, but I'd learned to trust Marek's word. If he said he'd tell me, he would. So I let it go, focusing instead on the small joys of daily life with our daughter. Zofia's first birthday fell on a sunny January day in 2021. Marek had insisted on having the party at the mansion, inviting not just his business associates, but also Dr. Kowalski, Helena, and the few friends I'd managed to maintain contact with despite my months of isolation. The great room had been transformed into a wonderland of balloons and streamers, with a cake shaped like Zofia's favorite stuffed animal, a slightly lopsided purple elephant. Watching our daughter's face light up at the decorations, her pudgy hands reaching for everything bright and shiny, filled me with a contentment I'd never expected to feel. "She's beautiful," Helena said, appearing at my elbow with a glass of champagne. "You both are. Motherhood suits you." I accepted the glass, watching Zofia toddle between guests with Marek hovering protectively nearby. "Thank you for everything you've done for us, for not judging when things were complicated." "Love is always complicated," she replied wisely. "But you two have found your way through it. That's what matters." As the party wound down and guests began to depart, Marek caught my eye across the room. Something in his expression made my pulse quicken. Nervous excitement and determination mingled together. "Can you meet me in the garden in 20 minutes?" he asked when the last guest had left and Zofia had been settled with a nanny for the evening. "There's something I need to show you." The garden had been transformed as dramatically as the great room. String lights hung between trees, creating a canopy of stars overhead. A path of luminarias led to the gazebo where we'd shared so many conversations over the past year. Marek stood waiting, dressed in a suit that made him look like the powerful man he'd been when we met, but his expression held none of the cold calculation of those early days. Instead, he looked nervous, vulnerable in a way that made my heart ache. "What's all this?" I asked, taking in the romantic setting. "A conversation I should have had with you months ago, maybe years ago." He took my hand, leading me to the gazebo where a single chair had been positioned to face the gardens. "Sit, please." I sat, watching as he began to pace, his usual composure fractured by whatever he needed to say. "When I first brought you here," he began, "I told myself it was about protection, about keeping you safe, keeping my child safe. And that was part of it. But the truth is, I brought you here because I was terrified of losing you. Marek, we've talked about this. Let me finish." He stopped pacing, dropping to one knee in front of my chair. "I've spent the past 2 years learning from you, learning that love isn't possession, that partnership means equality, that the strongest bonds are chosen, not enforced. You've made me better, Kasia. You and Zofia have given me a reason to be better." He pulled a small box from his pocket, opening it to reveal a ring that took my breath away. Not ostentatious or showy, but perfectly crafted, with the center stone the color of honey surrounded by smaller diamonds. "I know I've asked you to stay before. I've demanded it, manipulated you into it, done everything wrong. So now I'm asking properly. Kasia Kaminsky, will you marry me? Not because you're trapped here, not because of Zofia, but because you choose to build a life with me." Tears blurred my vision as I looked at this complicated man kneeling before me, offering not ownership, but partnership. Not a cage, but a choice. "You said you got me pregnant so I could never escape," I reminded him, my voice thick with emotion. "Do you remember?" "I remember." Shame colored his voice. "It was cruel and controlling and—" "True," I interrupted. "In a way you didn't intend. Because the trap you built didn't just catch me, Marek. It caught you too. You've been just as imprisoned as I was, by your fear of loss, your need for control. But we've both found a way out, haven't we? Together." I slid from the chair to kneel facing him, my hands covering his where they held the ring box. "Yes," I said. "I'll marry you. Not because I'm trapped, not because of Zofia, but because you're the man I choose. Every day, with all your flaws and strengths, I choose you." His smile was radiant, transforming his face with pure joy. "You're sure?" "Because I need you to know that I'll spend the rest of my life trying to be worthy of that choice." "I'm sure." I leaned forward, kissing him with all the love and exasperation and fierce affection that had grown between us. "Though I reserve the right to remind you of that promise when you get controlling and stubborn." He laughed against my lips, slipping the ring onto my finger with shaking hands. I would expect nothing less. We sat there in the garden as stars emerged overhead, talking about wedding plans and the future, about legitimizing Marek's business further, and maybe giving Zofia a sibling someday. The conversation flowed easily. Two people who'd learned each other's languages, who'd fought and surrendered, and ultimately chosen each other. "I never thanked you," Marek said eventually, his arm around my shoulders as we watched the lights twinkle in the trees. "For what?" "For not giving up on me, for seeing past the cage to the man inside it, for teaching me that love and control are opposites, and that you can't have both." I nestled closer to his warmth. "You taught me things too. That strength isn't just about independence. That asking for help isn't weakness. That sometimes the right prison is the one you choose." "Are you calling our relationship a prison?" "I'm calling it a choice we both made. The best choice, as it turns out." The next 4 years passed in a blur of ordinary magic. We married in January 2024, on Zofia's 4th birthday, in a small ceremony at the mansion where it all began. Dr. Kowalski walked me down the aisle. Helena wept quietly in the front row, and Zofia served as flower girl, with enthusiastic, if imprecise, aim. Marek's business continued its transformation into something completely legitimate. He became a respected consultant in cultural heritage preservation, working with governments to recover looted artifacts and establish proper provenance documentation. The dangerous edge that had once defined him softened into determination. The need for control channeled into protecting history rather than hoarding it. I found my own purpose, using my experience to help other young women who'd found themselves trapped in dangerous relationships. Marek provided funding for a safe house, using his connections to ensure protection for those seeking to escape. The irony wasn't lost on either of us, but it felt like completing a circle, using our painful beginning to help others find their way out. Zofia grew into a precocious child, curious and bold, equally comfortable in her father's study, surrounded by ancient artifacts, as in the garden chasing butterflies. She had Marek's determination and my stubborn independence, a combination that simultaneously exhausted and delighted us. "She's going to rule the world someday," Marek observed one evening in 2029, watching our 9-year-old daughter negotiate with the gardener about creating a butterfly sanctuary in the South Garden. "She's going to give us gray hair first," I replied. "Did you hear her argument? She used your exact reasoning techniques." "Mine?" He looked affronted. "That was pure you. The way she framed it as benefiting everyone, making it impossible to refuse, that's your diplomatic approach. Blaming me for your daughter being manipulative?" "Our daughter," he corrected, pulling me close. "And she's not manipulative. She's strategic. There's a difference." I laughed, settling into his embrace with the ease of years. "Whatever you need to tell yourself." As 2030 dawned, Marek made his final break with the underground world that had defined his youth. He announced the opening of Lewandowski Heritage Auctions, a completely legitimate auction house specializing in ethically sourced antiquities and verified provenances. Museums and collectors who'd once dealt with him in shadows now competed openly for pieces authenticated by his team. The grand opening was held on a cold January afternoon, with Zofia, now 10, running through the showrooms holding both our hands, her excitement infectious. "It's so big," she exclaimed, taking in the soaring ceilings and carefully lit display cases. "Dad, is all this really ours?" "It's ours," Merrick confirmed, looking not at the auction house but at me. Everything we've built, everything we are, it's ours. Together. I met his eyes, seeing in them the journey we'd traveled. From captor and captive to partners and parents. From a trap sprung in darkness to a choice made in light. Together, I agreed. That evening, as we stood on the balcony of the auction house overlooking the city, Zofia asleep against Marek's shoulder, I reflected on the strange path that had led us here. 9 years ago, I'd been a terrified young woman, trapped by circumstance and a man's obsessive need for control. Now I stood beside that same man, transformed by love and choice, and the determination to be better. Do you ever regret it? Merrick asked quietly. The way we started? I considered the question honestly. I regret the fear, the lack of choice, the feeling of being trapped. But I don't regret where it led us. Does that make sense? Perfect sense. He shifted Zofia carefully, his other arm coming around my shoulders. I regret how I treated you. I regret the cage I built. But I'll never regret that it brought you into my life. Even if I've spent the past 9 years systematically dismantling everything you thought you knew about control. His laugh was soft, mindful of our sleeping daughter. Especially then. You taught me that real power isn't in controlling others. It's in being vulnerable enough to be changed by them. Below us, the city sparkled with countless lights, each one a life being lived, a choice being made, a path being chosen. We'd chosen ours, repeatedly, through fear and love and everything in between. Zofia stirred against Marek's shoulder, murmuring in her sleep. We both instinctively moved to soothe her, our movements synchronized by years of shared parenting, shared life, shared love. Come on, I said. Let's take our daughter home. Home. Not a prison, not a cage, but a choice we'd made and kept making, day after day, year after year. The mansion where Merrick had once held me captive had become the foundation of a family built on broken beginnings and healed endings. As we drove through the January night, Zofia sleeping peacefully in her car seat, and Marek's hand finding mine across the console, I understood the truth we'd discovered together. Sometimes the trap you think will destroy you becomes the door to everything you never knew you needed. And sometimes the man who says you can never escape becomes the one you choose to stay with, not because you must, but because you want to. That choice, made freely, turned out to be the greatest freedom of all. The summer of 2032 arrived with unseasonable heat and the kind of chaos only a 12-year-old with unlimited curiosity could create. Zofia had discovered a passion for archaeology, specifically for the ethical recovery of historical artifacts, a field her father now dominated in ways that would have shocked his younger self. Dad, did you see this? She burst into Marek's office at Lewandowski Heritage Auctions, waving a tablet displaying some archaeological journal article. They found a complete Byzantine mosaic in Syria, and they need help with authentication and repatriation. I watched from the doorway as Marek looked up from his paperwork, his expression transforming from focused businessman to indulgent father in an instant. Let me see. He held out his hand for the tablet, scanning the article with the same intensity he'd once applied to identifying forgeries in the underground market. The provenance documentation looks solid, but they'll need to verify the period through thermoluminescence testing before any museum will touch it. Can we help them? Zofia bounced on her toes, her dark hair, so like her father's, flying around her shoulders. Please? I've been studying Byzantine mosaics all summer. I even wrote a paper on regional variations in tesserae composition. You wrote a paper? I interjected, entering the office properly. When did this happen? She had the grace to look slightly abashed. Last week. I was bored. Marek and I exchanged glances, his expression a mirror of my own mixture of pride and exasperation. Our daughter's intelligence and passion had far outstripped typical 12-year-old interests, a blessing and a challenge in equal measure. "Tell you what," Merrick said, closing his laptop with decisive click. "Why don't we make a family trip out of it? We can fly to the site, consult with the archaeological team, and if everything checks out, we can facilitate the piece's return to the Syrian government through proper channels." Zofia's squeal of delight nearly deafened us both. She threw herself at Merrick, nearly toppling his chair backward. Thank you. This is going to be amazing. I need to research the site's history and prepare questions for the lead archaeologist and—" She was already mentally planning, her words tumbling over each other. "Homework first," I reminded her. "You still have that math assignment due tomorrow." She groaned dramatically, but extracted herself from Merrick's arms. "Fine. But I'm doing my math equations with Byzantine numerical systems just to make it more interesting." After she'd departed in a whirlwind of energy, Merrick stood and crossed to where I leaned against the doorframe. "We created a monster," he said, but his smile was pure pride. "We created a brilliant, passionate young woman who's already more ethical about antiquities recovery than you were at 30, I corrected. Though I'm not sure where she gets the academic intensity from. Definitely from you." He pulled me into his arms, pressing a kiss to my temple. "The stubborn determination to pursue knowledge, even when everyone says it's impossible? That's pure Cassia." I settled into his embrace, breathing in the familiar scent of his cologne. 14 years since that fever-addled night when everything changed, and he could still make my heart skip with simple gestures. "How's the Dubois acquisition going?" I asked, referencing a delicate negotiation he'd been working on for months. "Complicated. The family wants to auction several pieces from their collection. But I'm concerned about the provenance of 3 items. They may have been looted during the Napoleonic Wars. What will you do?" "Pull them from the auction until we can verify their history properly." He said it so simply, as though choosing ethics over profit was natural, but I remembered the man he'd been, the one who would have sold first and asked questions never. "I'm proud of you," I said softly. He pulled back to look at me, surprise evident in his gray eyes. "After all these years, you can still say that and mean it?" "Especially after all these years, because I've watched you choose integrity repeatedly when the easier path was right there. That's not who you were, Merrick, but it's who you've become." Something shifted in his expression, vulnerability flickering across his usually controlled features. "Because of you. Because you refused to let me be less than I could be. Because you chose to listen." I reached up to cup his face, feeling the familiar scratch of stubble. "I pushed, but you had to choose to change. That's all you." He kissed me then, not with the desperate intensity of our early days, but with the deep certainty of years spent building something real. "Come with me," he said when we finally parted. "There's something I want to show you." He led me through the auction house's main gallery, past display cases holding artifacts that would be sold to museums and collectors next week, each piece carefully documented and ethically sourced. We climbed to the second floor, to a section that was still under construction. "This," he said, gesturing to an empty wing with walls painted a soft cream, "is going to be the Kaminsky-Lewandowski Education Center." I stared at him. "The what?" "An educational facility." He moved through the space, pointing to different areas. "Here, we'll have workshops for students interested in archaeology and art history. There, interactive displays about the ethical recovery of cultural heritage. And in that corner, a research library open to the public. Merrick, this is incredible, but why are you naming it after both of us?" He turned to face me fully, his expression earnest. "Because none of this would exist without you. The business I've built, the ethics that guide it, the purpose that drives it. All of it comes from the woman who refused to let me keep her in a cage, who demanded better and made me believe I could be better. Tears pricked at my eyes. You're going to make me cry in public. We're alone, he pointed out, and I'm not done. The center's mission will focus specifically on helping young people, particularly young women, who feel trapped by circumstance. We'll offer scholarships, mentorship, job training, all the things that might have helped you if circumstances had been different. I understood then what he was doing, transforming the cage he'd built around me into a door for others, using the very thing that had imprisoned me as a tool to free others. When did you plan all this? Over the past year. I wanted it to be perfect before I showed you. He pulled me close again. Our daughter is going to change the world, Cassia. But first, I wanted to make sure we'd already started changing it ourselves. The education center opened 6 months later, in January 2033, on Zofia's 13th birthday. The timing was deliberate, Marek's way of marking how far we'd come since that cold January day when she'd been born into a household of complicated love and uncertain futures. Zofia cut the ribbon herself, her speech about the importance of ethical archaeology and cultural preservation bringing tears to my eyes. At 13, she spoke with a passion and clarity that rivaled scholars twice her age. My parents taught me that history belongs to everyone, she concluded, her voice carrying across the assembled crowd. Not just to those who can afford to buy it or those powerful enough to take it. This center exists to make sure the next generation understands that. Thank you. The applause was thunderous. I felt Marek's arm slip around my waist as we stood to the side, watching our daughter accept congratulations from the mayor, from museum directors, from the young scholarship recipients who'd be the center's first students. She's remarkable, I whispered. She's ours, he replied simply. The best thing we ever created. Later that evening, after the celebration had wound down, and Zofia had gone to bed exhausted but elated, Marek and I found ourselves in the garden where he'd proposed years before. The gazebo lights still twinkled overhead, and the path of luminarias still glowed, creating a space that existed outside of time. Do you remember? I asked, settling into his arms on the bench where we'd shared so many conversations. What you said to me the morning after Zofia was born, after all the pain and fear of delivery. I said a lot of things that day. You said that we'd created life together, and in doing so, we'd created a family, that it changed everything. I remember. His chin rested on top of my head. I meant it. Still do. You were right, but not in the way you thought. I turned to look at him in the soft light. It wasn't just that we became parents. It was that Zofia gave us a reason to be better than our worst instincts. You learned to let go of control because she needed a father, not a jailer. I learned to trust because she needed to see strength, not just resistance. She saved us, Marek said quietly. This child I once saw as a way to trap you. She freed us both. It was the truest thing he'd ever said. Zofia had been born into a cage of her father's making and a mother's reluctant acceptance, but she'd transformed it through the simple act of existing, through needing love instead of possession, through teaching us that the strongest bonds are chosen, not enforced. I have a confession, I said, after a comfortable silence. I've been working on something too, something I wanted to run by you. Oh? I want to write a book about our story, about the journey from captivity to choice, about how trauma can transform into purpose if you're willing to do the work. Marek was quiet for a moment, processing. That would mean sharing things that were private, dark things. I wouldn't use real names or identifying details, but Marek, there are so many women trapped the way I was, held by men who claim love but practice control. If our story, the messy, complicated truth of it, could help even one person recognize their own cage and find the courage to either escape or transform it. I trailed off, searching his face for understanding. You want to turn our darkest moments into hope for others. Yes. He cupped my face gently. Then you should write it. All of it. The fear and the anger and the slow transformation. Don't sanitize what I was or what I did. People need to understand that change is possible, but only if you first acknowledge the truth. It won't paint you in a flattering light. Good. I don't deserve flattering light for how I treated you in the beginning. What I deserve is to spend the rest of my life proving I'm not that man anymore. He kissed me softly. Write the book, Cassia. Turn our cage into a key. The book, published a year later under a pseudonym, became an unexpected success. Women from around the world reached out, sharing their own stories of escaping controlling relationships or transforming them through fierce insistence on equality. The Kaminsky-Lewandowski Education Center started a support group based on the book's principles, offering counseling and resources to those seeking freedom. Marek read every testimonial, every letter that came through. I'd find him sometimes in his study, surrounded by stories of women who'd found the courage to leave or the strength to stay and demand better. This is the legacy, he said one evening, gesturing to the letters. Not the auction house, not the artifacts we've recovered. This. People finding freedom because we were brave enough to share our truth. By 2035, as I approached 37 and Marek 48, our lives had settled into a rhythm that felt earned rather than lucky. Lewandowski Heritage Auctions had become the gold standard for ethical antiquities dealing. Zofia, now 15, was already taking summer internships at archaeological sites, her passion for cultural preservation rivaling her father's expertise. The mansion where it all began had undergone its own transformation. The gates that once kept me prisoner now stood open during the day, welcoming students from the education center who came to study artifacts in Marek's personal collection. The master suite where I'd spent so many restless nights planning escape had become a sanctuary where we retreated together, equal partners in every sense. We're running out of time, Zofia announced one Saturday morning, bursting into the breakfast room where Marek and I were enjoying lazy coffee and newspapers. The Syrian government approved our petition. We can help with the Byzantine mosaic recovery, but we need to be on site in 2 weeks. I looked at Marek over the rim of my cup, seeing my own mixture of pride and trepidation reflected in his eyes. Our daughter was growing up, her interests carrying her toward a future that would inevitably take her away from us. Then we'd better start planning, he said. Can't let an opportunity like this pass by. As Zofia dove into logistics with the same intensity she brought to everything, I reached across the table to take Marek's hand. He squeezed gently, understanding the bittersweet moment. We were watching our daughter become who she was meant to be, just as we'd become who we were meant to be. She's going to leave us someday, I said quietly, after Zofia had rushed off to start packing despite still having 2 weeks. Go off to university, have her own adventures. I know. His thumb traced circles on my palm, a gesture of comfort refined over years. And we'll let her go, because that's what parents who love properly do. No cages for her. No cages for anyone, he agreed. Not anymore. That evening, as sunset painted the garden in shades of gold and amber, the three of us walked the paths together. Zofia chattered excitedly about tesserae patterns and repatriation protocols, her intelligence and passion a testament to what children could become when raised with love instead of control. Marek and I walked hand in hand behind her, watching this remarkable human we'd created against all odds. Do you ever miss it? I asked him quietly. The power, the control, the certainty of always being the one making decisions? He considered the question seriously, never dismissing my need for honesty. Sometimes I miss the simplicity of it, of deciding something and making it happen without negotiation or compromise. But then I look at what I have now, what we've built together, and I realize that the old way was just fear dressed up as strength. And now? Now I have actual strength, the kind that comes from choosing vulnerability, from trusting that love doesn't require possession, from knowing that the people I care about stay because they want to, not because they have to. Sophia turned back to us, the setting sun creating a halo effect around her dark hair. Come on, slowpokes. I want to show you both something in the garden before it gets dark. We followed our daughter deeper into the grounds, this space that had witnessed our transformation from captor and captive to partners and parents. The garden had grown wild in certain areas, allowed to return to nature in a deliberate rejection of excessive control. Here, Sophia said, stopping in a small clearing where butterflies danced among lavender and wild roses. This is where I come when I need to think, where I come to remember that beautiful things can grow without being forced. I felt tears prick my eyes at her casual wisdom, this child who'd learned the lessons we'd needed years to understand. It's perfect, I managed to say. Marek knelt beside her, his hand resting gently on her shoulder. Your mother and I used to walk these gardens when you were a baby, back when we were still figuring out how to be a family. Tell me, Sophia said, settling onto the grass with the expectation that we'd join her. Tell me the real story, not the sanitized version you think I need to hear. We sat, the three of us forming a small circle in the wildflower clearing, and for the first time, we told our daughter the complete truth. About the fever and the kiss, about the pregnancy that had felt like a trap, about the cage and the gradual transformation. So, Dad basically kidnapped you? Sophia asked when we finished, her expression troubled. In a way, yes, I admitted. But over time, we both chose to make it into something different, something better. That's messed up, she observed bluntly. But also kind of beautiful? That you could take something that started so wrong and make it right? We didn't make it right, Marek corrected gently. We just kept choosing to be better than we were. And we're still choosing, every day. Sophia was quiet for a moment, processing. Then she looked at us both with those serious eyes that seemed older than her 15 years. I think I get it. You're saying that the beginning doesn't have to define the ending. That people can change if they want to badly enough. That love can transform if both people are willing to do the work. Exactly that, I said, pulling her into a hug. And you, sweetheart, are the proof that even the most complicated beginnings can create beautiful endings. As stars began to emerge overhead, and fireflies joined the butterflies in the garden, we sat together, three people bound by blood and choice, and the fierce determination to be better than our circumstances. The cage Marek had built 14 years ago no longer existed, transformed over time into a home where doors stayed open and choices were honored. The fear that had driven him to trap me had been replaced by trust earned through years of choosing each other daily. And Sophia, born into that complicated beginning, had become the embodiment of transformation itself. Proof that even from darkness, light could emerge if you were willing to nurture it. I love you both, she said, her voice cutting through the peaceful evening. Even knowing the messy parts. Maybe especially because of them. Because you didn't pretend it was perfect. You just kept working to make it better. Marek's arm came around my shoulders, pulling me close. We love you too, little bird, more than we ever thought possible. As we made our way back to the house as full darkness fell, I reflected on the journey we'd traveled. From that storm-filled night in March 2019 when everything changed, through the fear and fury of captivity, through Zophia's birth and the slow transformation of our relationship, to this moment of hard-won peace. The man who'd once told me I could never escape had become the man I chose to stay with. The cage he'd built had been dismantled piece by piece, replaced by a home built on honesty and choice, and the daily practice of love without possession. And the child he'd seen as insurance against my flight had become the teacher who showed us both that the strongest bonds are those freely chosen and continually renewed. In the end, Merrick had been both right and wrong that June morning when he'd intercepted my escape. I had been his, in a way, carrying his child and bound to him by circumstance. But what he hadn't understood then, what had taken years to learn, was that being his meant nothing if I wasn't also fully my own. True belonging, we'd discovered, required freedom. Not freedom to leave necessarily, but freedom to choose to stay. Every day, every moment, choosing each other and the life we'd built. Not because we were trapped, but because it was where we wanted to be. As we entered the mansion that had witnessed our entire journey, Sophia already chattering about tomorrow's research plans, Marek caught my hand. "Thank you," he said quietly. "For what?" "For not giving up. On me, on us, on the possibility that people can change. For being stubborn enough to demand better and patient enough to wait while I figured out how to give it." I stopped in the hallway, pulling him close for a kiss that still, after all these years, had the power to make my heart race. "Thank you," I replied, "for being brave enough to change, for proving that cages can become doorways if you're willing to unlock them." Zophia's voice called from upstairs, something about forgotten archaeology books, and we both smiled at the familiar chaos. "Shall we?" Merrick asked, gesturing toward the stairs. "Together," I confirmed, as I had so many times before. Together we climbed toward our daughter and our future, two people who'd found each other in darkness and created light, who'd transformed a trap into a choice, who'd proven that even the most complicated beginnings could lead to endings worth every struggle. The cage was gone. In its place stood a home, a family, and a legacy of transformation that would outlast us both. And that, I thought as Merrick's laughter mixed with Sophia's in the hallway ahead, was the truest freedom of all.